Hello, online pipe community. This is Ethan, Parsimonious Piper, coming to you again with,
Otter Piper.
and we are going to look at the fifth letter in C.S. Lewis Screwtape letters today. Let me set my pipe down. We'll get right to it. My dear Wormwood, it is a little bit disappointing to expect a detailed report on your work and to receive instead such a vague rhapsody as your last letter. You say you are delirious with joy because the European humans have started another of their wars. I see very well what has happened to you. You're not delirious, you're only drunk. Reading between the lines in your very unbalanced account of the patient's sleepless night, I can reconstruct your state of mind fairly accurately. For the first time in your career, you have tasted that wine which is the reward of all our labors, the anguish and bewilderment of a human soul, and it has gone to your head. I can hardly blame you. I do not expect old heads on young shoulders. Did the patient respond to some of your terror pictures of the future? Did you work in some good self pitying glances at the happy past? Some fine thrills in the pit of his stomach, were there? You played your violin prettily, did you? Well, it's all very natural. But do remember, Wormwood, that duty comes before pleasure. If any present self indulgence on your part leads to the ultimate loss of the prey, you will be left eternally thirsting for that draught of which you are now so much enjoying your first sip. If, on the other hand, by steady and cool headed application here and now, you can finally secure his soul, he will then be yours forever. A brimful living chalice of despair and horror and astonishment, which you can raise to your lips as often as you please. So do not allow any temporary excitement to distract you from the real business of undermining faith and preventing the formation of virtues. Give me without fail in your next letter a full account of the patient's reactions to the war so that we can consider whether you are likely to do more good by making him an extreme patriot or an ardent pacifist. There are all sorts of possibilities. In the meantime, I must warn you not to hope too much from a war. Of course, a war is entertaining. The immediate fear and suffering of the humans is a legitimate and pleasing refreshment for our myriads of toiling workers. But what permanent good does it do unless we make use of it for bringing souls to our Father below? When I see the temporal suffering of humans who finally escape us, I feel as if I had been allowed to taste the first course of a rich banquet and then denied the rest. It is worse than not to have tasted it at all. The enemy, true to his barbarous methods of warfare, allows us to see the short misery of his favorites only to tantalize and torment us, to mock the incessant hunger which, during this present phase of the great conflict, his blockade is admittedly imposing. Let us therefore think rather how to use than how to enjoy this European war, for it has certain tendencies inherent in it which are in themselves by no means in our favor. We may hope for a good deal of cruelty and unchastity, but if we're not careful, we shall see thousands turning in this tribulation to the enemy, while tens of thousands who do not go so far as that will nevertheless have their attention diverted from themselves to values and causes which they believe to be higher than the self. I know that the enemy disapproves many of these causes, but that is where he is so unfair. He often makes prizes of humans who have given their lives for causes he thinks bad on the monstrously sophistical ground that the humans thought them good and were following the best they knew. Consider, too, what undesirable deaths occur in wartime. Men are killed in places where they knew they might be killed, and to which they go, if they are at all of the enemy's party, prepared. How much better for us if all humans died in costly nursing homes amid doctors who lie, nurses who lie, friends who lie, as we have trained them, promising life to the dying, encouraging the belief that sickness excuses every indulgence, and even, if our workers know their job, withholding all suggestions of a priest, lest it should betray to the sick man his true condition. And how disastrous for us is the continual remembrance of death which war enforces. One of our best weapons, contented worldliness, is rendered useless. In wartime, not even a human can believe that he is going to live forever. I know that Scabtree and others have seen in wars a great opportunity for attacks on faith, but I think that view was exaggerated. The enemy's human partisans have all been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption, so that a faith which is destroyed by a war or a pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying. I am speaking now of diffused suffering over a long period, such as the war will produce. Of course, at the present moment of terror, bereavement, or physical pain, you may catch your man when his reason is temporarily suspended. But even then, if he applies to enemy headquarters, I have found that the post is nearly always defended. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Thank you, Ethan. War. What is it good for? Absolutely something. He uses, Lewis talks about the European War, and his nephew, delirious with joy, thinking that it's going to be maybe a slam dunk for him and his patient. And Screwtape critiques him quite well, that he better not get too delirious with joy, thinking that it's going to be a slam dunk. But yet, Screwtape's going to convince him to be persistent and how to use it rather than how to enjoy it. But then Lewis goes into what I would say for me is the meat of the letter, and that is redemptive suffering. That the enemy, which would be God for Screwtape, God uses suffering and redemptive suffering, and how we as Christians know that through the cross, through the suffering of the cross, came the joys of the resurrection. But yet, what they're looking for, what Screwtape wants Wormwood to really look at, is the best weapon is that contented worldliness. Make sure to undermine their faith and the formation of virtues. That word contented, Ethan, contented worldliness, got me really thinking. And what it got me to think about is what I would use contented spirituality. And in my own work as a priest, as I try to really become stronger in my own faith and to really look at how something like a Wormwood or a Screwtape tries to get in the devil in the details within my own life, I realized that contented worldliness or that contented spirituality. And what I struggle with a lot of times, interior struggle, as I try to live my faith in the parish and try to preach to people and so forth. A lot of times a lot of them don't want to be challenged. They want to come to church. I'm not saying everybody, no, but they want to come to church, put that little check mark. I did my thing, and then I can go on. But if I maybe prick their conscience a little bit, a lot of people don't care for that. Church isn't, I want to come, do my thing, and that contented spirituality. But you start getting into redemptive suffering, and you start challenging them on that, they can get a little angry, which maybe isn't a bad thing. But I really appreciate how Lewis challenges us to look at the persistence of Screwtape, but also the value of redemptive suffering within our own life and faith.
Well, and yes, and the long term of it, he Screwtape tells Wormwood, look, you may have some momentary suffering and pain that you can take advantage of, while your patient is not thinking, that while he's not in his right mind. But the long-term suffering tends to work, in the enemy's, God's favor. One thing that also jumped out at me was his discussion, because they're specifically in the context of World War II here, uh, talking about soldiers going into battle knowing very clearly that they are mortal, and that this, this day could be their last. Um, it's true then that many of those, if they were leaning toward a Christian faith to begin with, have firmed up their faith and don't have a fear of death. Well, there's a lesson there actually for the rest of us as well, and that is that if we have a healthy faith, we are very aware of our mortality, that we are but um, dust in the winds, to quote that great Southern gospel group Kansas. Um, but we are mortal. We don't have to fear that death, and that lets us live with the spiritual freedom that completely protects us in that one aspect, that one regard, from these kinds of attacks from Screwtape and Wormwood.
When I would go to a hospital to visit the sick, there's a rite that we call, and it used to be referred to more as the Last Rites, and we now refer to it more as anointing of the sick. It's a softening of the sacrament, which for us would, when somebody is in serious physical danger, this particular rite is said to give them a strengthening of faith. But a lot of times it was used when somebody was dying, and that's what it got used to. And I mention that because uh, Lewis refers to the fact that it'd be much better, as you mentioned, if they, if they were in nursing homes and so forth, and didn't think that death could hit them or whatever it could be, that contented worldliness. And it says, don't, Screwtape says, don't let them think about even bringing a priest in. And I say that because when I visited people in the hospital, especially those who were still of the old country, were here, older, I've been yelled at quite a bit to leave the room. I'm not dying. Get out of my room. And it's that sense of, what were they taught, or what
Mm-hmm.
was their understanding, that they literally, you yell at the priest, yell at me, and tell me to get out of the room. I'm not dying. And it's interesting. It looks like that's exactly what Screwtape kind of wants to. He wants to Wormwood to bring it home.
Yep. That we uh, this thing that we tell people until they go into hospice, it seems, we tell them that they're getting better, um, until it becomes obvious that they're not. Uh, instead of uh, instead of embracing, in some ways, our mortality, and using that, in fact, as a tool against our enemy, and not letting them have that foothold. And yeah, it is interesting. Now, of course, I haven't been there yet, and so I don't know how quietly I will walk into that final night, or whether I will go kicking and screaming, or whether I will be a good and faithful example. Can't tell you. Until we live that, we don't know it. But having been able to observe older family members of mine dying with a very a beautiful, uh, quiet and strong faith, and without facing it, death completely without fear. That I, that's a powerful statement.
I agree, and I just brought to mind that I remember a couple times um, going to the hospital, and there'd be a couple people in the room, and I'd visit the Catholic patient, and there's a few times the other patient would say, "Father, could you come over? Could you pray with me?" And a couple times, they specifically said, "Well, I'm Jewish. I'm not Catholic, but we see, you priests coming in all the time. Would you just pray with me, because I don't know when my last day will be in that." And I really looked at that as a really special and even reverent time, because
Mhm.
here is somebody that they see their own mortality. They see the fact that I'm a religious person, and they just wanted that connection. And that's exactly what I would say. That's exactly what Screwtape would be warning Wormwood. Don't allow that to happen. That recognition of their mortality and a desire to connect to God.
Well, and if we dial it back even from the mortality, this usefulness of bad circumstances and of natural and human-made disasters and evils, um, in the short term, if we allow it, can shake our faith or turn us away from it. It really is. It's not just a matter of mortal fear, but the things that go on daily around us that we allow to become that type of a fear, so that we forget and stop trusting in the only one who can get us through those dark times.
The letter, I think, what really hits home is that word contented worldliness,
Mm-hmm.
is to be careful of being too content, where you just not to just settle in so easily. uh, yeah, I'm gonna stop. Yeah, okay, it's
Well,
not coming to mind.
you said it as well as I think you could say it earlier. You
Yeah,
said this complacency that we get in a spiritual sense, that um, there's no need for growth or change or challenge. That we're okay right where we are.
yes,
Well,
exactly.
folks, I hope again that this has pricked your minds into a little bit of thought regarding uh, today's topics. And as always, Lewis has such keen insights into the human psyche and the ways that the Father below, our enemy, uses it against us. So, with that, light something you like. Maybe have a little thought about some of these things. We'll see you again next week.